Camp Hacker, bringing your world into focus.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Camp Hacker. This podcast is dedicated to what many camp professionals believe to be the most important time at camp, no matter what you call it, staff training, orientation, or leadership training. This critical time period prepares your staff to fulfill all the promises that you make to parents and customers throughout the rest of the year. My name is Ruby Compton. I'm the Summer Camp Program Director at Green River Preserve in Western North Carolina, and I'm so excited to have our other Camp Code hosts introduce themselves, and we're excited to share this topic with you today. So, Gab, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, my name is Gabrielle Rail, and I'm one of the camp directors at Camp Oro. Camp Oro is an all-girls camp with a linguistic program, and we're situated in the Laurentian Mountains. And I'm usually I call from Montreal, but I'm actually up at camp today in our hard-working office.
And I'm Beth Allison. I am a camping consultant who was once an executive director and camp director for 15 years with my husband Travis Allison in Central Ontario in Muskoka, Canada. And I am currently a camp consultant who really focuses on leadership training. It is my passion.
Cool, thanks. And today's topic is about building your summer leadership team. Talking about, we're actually planning on kind of splitting up this idea of your summer leadership team into several different podcasts. So today we're really going to focus on identifying those leaders and about that first step of getting them into that position. And Beth, do you want to explain a little bit about why we chose this topic?
Absolutely. The importance of a strong team of senior staff members who can be there to help you accomplish your goals cannot be stressed enough. Every director needs that group of people who can be there when you can't be, who can be the eyes and ears of the director, who can see and hear what the needs of the staff and the campers are. And every director needs that dedicated team of people who fully understands the camp's philosophy and mission, and not only knows what it takes to fulfill it, but is passionate about doing the work to ensure that you do. And I think one of the other reasons we chose it is because it's our responsibility as camp directors to develop young leaders, not just for the sake of camp, but for the sake of them as well. So that's why we chose it.
Great, thanks, Beth. So we're going to dive right in and start off with the question of where do you look for your summer leadership team members? What are those places that you've found to be the best harvesting grounds for those folks? So let's start with you, Gab.
Definitely in-house. Not to sound too planning ahead, but our CITs basically. Looking at those guys and saying, here, 8 and 4 or 5 years, where are they going to be? Basically, and I think that that's what helps our entire program is that we know that our most successful leadership team members are from our camp, and what does their camper experience look like? What does their CIT experience look like? What does their first year as a staff member look like? I think that sort of everything that's done is that it's always a training ground for when and if they're going to become a leadership team member, and it's also a lot of the times you'll find that some of those kids that are a little bit shyer when they're 14 or 15 make excellent leadership team members. So you're really wanting that quality to be high so that they can shine, they can fill those spaces when they get older. So but it's very, very much in-house. We of course had to have hired outside of camp before, but that's very difficult for a lot of people, and we try to get in some support staff to help that person out and also bridge that trust gap between staff and leadership team member, but mostly in-house for us.
Cool. How about you, Beth?
I'm afraid my answer is not much different from Gab's. When I thought back on this question, I realized that the majority of our leadership members were homegrown. Some of them, Gab said she went back to her CITs, and for me, some of them were campers, senior campers, LITs, even younger campers, counselors, program staff. So as a director, I was always on the lookout for people who had that something special that would make a great staff member or a great leader somewhere else, not necessarily at camp. And those very special few who would make that outstanding member of a leadership team. And I would literally search them out every summer and cultivate them. And so I think the important nugget here is that I think what Gab is saying as well is that we took the time and the effort to cultivate them over the years, that it wasn't just sort of something that came about, oh, she'll be good when she gets there, but that we took the time every summer to cultivate and get them ready. I would let them know that they would make an excellent staff member one day, even if that was 5, 6, 7, 10 years from now. Every summer we would have conversations about what roles they wanted to play in camp's future and why. I would also write letters or send cards or often meet up with staff during the school year. If we were near a university or college for camp business or on vacation sometimes, we would get together with staff who were there as students and take them out for dinner or coffee or talk about their future roles in camp. And I would really be specific about letting them know what I saw in them that made me see them as future leadership team members. And we discussed what they would need to work on in order to get there. So whether it was soft skills that they needed to work on or quals that they needed to get or that kind of thing to sort of help them out with their journey. And as Gab said, because the leadership team is such an important part of camp, I always needed people who understood every aspect of camp. So that's what she was saying about, giving them support if you brought in someone new, because it was really helpful to have somebody who understood every aspect of camp, who'd worked in many areas of camp, was intimately familiar with how things were run, and who I had a chance to see perform on a daily basis for years was really helpful. And it helped to build up that level of trust that Gab just talked about. That's needed. So these were the people that I knew I could leave in charge for a few days if I absolutely had to, for a death in the family or something where Travis and I would have to leave site for a few days and I would know that camp was being run exactly as it should be. So I put a lot into cultivating those people. All that being said, there were summers when we did hire people who were brand new to Glenmore or to Cairn, but they came from recommendations of current or past leadership members or fellow directors whose opinions I really trusted. So I used my networks to find those people so that they came with a recommendation and it wasn't just, an application in the mail. So there's my answer. Sorry, it's not something new.
Cool. And I think something that's similar about both of y'all's answers is that time piece of looking back or looking forward and realizing that it is something that takes time and that you have to be forward thinking, that it's 3-4 years down the road before this leader is necessarily going to be there, but what can I do now to plant those seeds? In that time piece as well, I would encourage you that if you are looking at maybe your current leaders and going, I don't know if anybody's ready for this, to look back a year or two and maybe look at some of those folks who weren't at camp this past summer and see if there's somebody who you can reach out to and say, hey, what are you doing this summer? Are you interested in this other position at camp? Because they may not even have thought about that. And I think sometimes people get in the mindset that the only people that I can hire on that very upper tier of administrative staff are people that want to be camp directors. And that is not true at all. My right hand this summer was getting ready to go to grad school in Colorado. And so he is doing environmental writing. It's something totally different. Will he return to camp one day? Yes, absolutely. But he was phenomenal because of the skills that he brought to the table. So just know that you don't have to have such a narrow focus as far as I'm looking for people that want to be camp directors. They can be phenomenal leaders that are going in very different paths. And that 1 year or 2 years at camp may be incredible for their development. I have worked on a couple different teams where we have brought in new folks into that leadership team. And I've seen it go really well, and I've seen it go not so well. So I think, looking at, again, those recommendations of staff who understand what that job takes, I think that's really critical. I hired an intern my first summer as a director at Green River, and, she had never worked at camp. And she was one who I kind of had to fight to hire her because other people were like, I just don't know if she has it. And I was like, no, she does. She definitely does. And I think that trust your gut. If you meet that person and just think, yeah, they're going to do this. If you commit to it and you feel really good about it and you give them the training and the management that they need, they're going to be able to grow into that leader. I think that take those chances sometimes. And when you're trust your gut. That's what I would say. I think that's a lesson I've really learned over the last couple of years. Like when you're feeling this could be really great, or I see something here, go for it, because it can really work out well for you.
Before we move on, Ruby, if I can just add, because you made me think of something, is that you talked about staff who had gone on and hadn't returned to camp for a while and finding them. That's an excellent point, because sometimes those people who are such awesome staff members are awesome because camp is not the only thing they do. Mm-hmm. So they're totally cool people because they do all these other things, like trek across Peru for a summer, or do all of those kinds of things. So sometimes just that invitation to come back to camp will bring you somebody who has all this other experience that's not just summer camp and has never left your camp, but also if they know that they're coming back for that one summer, they're going to put everything they've got into it, so they can be a real resource too.
Yeah, and I also asked my leadership team of that year that just did their that summer, who do they think would be a good leadership team member next year or the year after that, and why? And especially since they've already done the job, and you as you said, Beth, these are people that you really, really trust, and they're going to put their good judgment above friendship. And they might be really great friends with somebody, but they're not going to recommend them to be a leadership team member. Or I've never had somebody recommend somebody that shouldn't have been a leadership team member because they understand what it takes. And I find that those are sometimes I miss those staff members. Sometimes I'm like, oh, really? I would have never have thought. And they've turned out to be great members of our team. So it's your idea is really important, but also asking the people that work with staff members and see who's stepped up, and I think is quite wonderful. I've had some really nice surprises in that, like very lovely.
Cool. So that's actually a pretty good segue into our next question, which is, what are the qualities that you look for? What is it that makes you see a younger leader and go, that's going to be a future leadership team member? Beth, do you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. I mean, of course, they have to be responsible, conscientious, caring. All of those things are pretty obvious. For me, the best ones have hearts the size of the room that I'm sitting in. And they made campers and staff want to look up to them and want to be them. But the biggest characteristic for me was integrity. They have to have integrity. They have to be able to walk the walk. I really needed them to be kind. That was really important. Have an attitude of servanthood and stewardship. So they put the needs of camp and its people ahead of their own. I was really looking for people who were problem solvers, who could understand the values of camp and make really good decisions based on that. So for us, it was the 4 S's. For other people, whatever pillars your camp stands on, that I knew these staff members would make those good decisions. But I also needed them to know when it was time to come and talk to me. When they were at that point where, should I take my own initiative or ask the director, they knew when that was. I also think it was important that they were really excited to learn and to develop new skills and to want to develop new skills and not get stuck in a rut and stay at camp for 10 years and never be excited to do anything new. They needed to be creative, for sure. We were a not-for-profit camp, so figuring out how to do things on a small budget was important, but also just adding that whole aspect of creativity to camp. They needed to have a full understanding of the reason we run summer camp, and that they were at camp to fulfill camp's mission. And I think because it was leadership team and not program staff or resource or senior staff or whatever you call it, but that echelon of leadership team, they needed to have the ability to see the big picture, to know when it was time to stand back and see what was needed for the camp or what certain people needed at certain times. People that get caught in all the little details and don't necessarily stand back and see the big picture make great other staff members, but not necessarily leadership teams. So that for me was really key. And then they absolutely needed to work well on a team. And And as Gab said, to understand that camp came first. So they were the people that understood if they needed to tell me that somebody needed to be fired, that they needed to do that, as opposed to it was their friend and they weren't going to say anything. So that for me was really important. So having those skills, or having those qualities, I mean, were really important because we could teach them the skills. But I needed people to have those qualities before we got started. You can foster the skills, but you got to have that stuff to begin with.
And I think a lot of the things that you said, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, how do I find out if people have these? Like, a lot of what you just said, you could take and put on a job description, or you can craft interview questions that are framed around so much of what Beth just said. So, use that language, use those things that we've identified to help you identify that in your future leaders. How about you, Gab? What are some of how did you know?
I think Beth's list was very detailed.
Sorry.
No, it's great. Basically, I'm looking for people that there's no job that's beneath them. And it's the misconception that as you go up in an organization, then you don't have to do those little jobs. But at camp, it's almost the complete reverse. It's like, I am definitely plunging that toilet. You're doing the stuff that other people, you want somebody that's going to do, no jobs beneath them. And that's, I think, great role modeling for our younger staff members and for our campers. Of course, they believe in the mission, not only that they're following it, but they want it to grow. Yeah, so they believe in what we're doing. And that goes back to, it's not putting the job in front of other people, but it's understanding what Beth is saying is the big picture. So if somebody, let's just say, breaks, one of those big rules that, Beth says before, let's make this perfectly clear. If they break one of those, let's make this perfectly clear, they are going to come forward and say, listen, this is what happened. And if it's a friend, that's, of course, very, very difficult, but they understand the importance because, camp isn't about all of these individuals. It's about, we have an agreement and we're trying to uphold that agreement for the bigger picture. Also, for me, what's really important is with the big picture, and Beth had mentioned detail or, small things. Detail for me is very important in the sense that if a camper comes to you and says, I was cold last night, they're writing that down and they're making sure that counselor is making sure that camper has an extra hoodie on or a sweater, and they will take care of this issue. They won't let it go. They won't wait too long. They will almost, sort of keep them up at night if they forgot. I like that. It sometimes makes for a little bit more of a stressful leadership team member. Like they get a little stressed out, but as long as you're available to talk to them, and they have to communicate with you. They sort of just have a need to communicate. I like that as well because then it lets me help them. So I agree with all the other things that Beth had said, definitely. But those are a couple of things I'm looking for where they're really paying attention to those details, the campers, the staff members, that kind of stuff.
Cool. I have one to add that I did not realize is something that you need, but again, my program intern this summer brought this to my attention when I was having a conversation with him about, who do you see as a successor? And he said, the reality of it is whoever's in this role has got to have their stuff together. And it has to be somebody who, their personal life is in a good place and they can deal with stress because they're going to take on everybody else's stuff. Everybody else is having a frustrating day. It's going to just get laid on that person. And if that person isn't in a good place on their own, they're just going to crack. And I had never recognized that as something that would be a necessity, but it was like, oh my gosh, light bulb. Yes, you're totally right. And that doesn't mean that, you can't prevent when life happens, right? And life infiltrates our camp bubble. But I think that that's something you can look for is somebody who really seems to have stuff figured out and to be solid, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan and everything that way, but just that things are in order and that it doesn't feel like their life is in chaos or in flux. Because again, they have to be able to really just absorb the shock that's going to come from the rest of the staff. So I think that's the biggest one that I learned this year that really struck me. I think the other thing is, again, I worked on a leadership team at my last camp that was 20, 30 people. And I went through the process where that leadership team was expanded from 8 to 20 to 30. And there were positions that year that we were begging people to take. And so I saw in that summer, people kind of be forced into roles or step up into roles that they weren't necessarily ready for. And, how to make people succeed in those roles. It really gave me a clear view that you don't have to have the ideal candidate to have a great leader. Again, with the right amount of coaching and kind of really talking to them at those key moments and sitting them down and saying, hey, we've seen this. This is not the right direction. We need to steer in this direction. I saw some people who just totally impressed me and surprised me. So again, if you're sitting here kind of going like, I didn't start crafting my leaders 4 years ago. I don't know, I'm new at this camp and I don't know who those people are. And I don't know that I have those people, or everybody left because I'm new, or if it's that sort of situation, again, with the right amount of training and the right management, I think you can craft leaders into amazing people and amazing leaders. And there's so many great resources that are out there for that. And so don't get bogged down in like, I don't have this great person that's just waiting to step into the role. Because I've certainly seen people that, were maybe even mediocre frontline staff that stepped up and became incredible unit leaders or head counselors, or even up into those higher up positions, because I think they had great people over them that were showing them and leading them the way and helping, investing in their experience as younger leaders. Any other thoughts on that question?
I think for me, something that's important is the want to have their own staff members succeed, and that whether they're in charge of 3 staff members, 15, 50, that they want their staff members to succeed. And I think a common, as you were talking about, Ruby, there's some, maybe sort of middle range staff members that maybe don't shine too much but do great as leadership team members. I think it's because a lot of the times the ones that shine are the ones that are sort of seeking the spotlight, are enjoying being in front of people, and they're great with kids and they're great on stage, but that doesn't necessarily, you want somebody that's going to encourage your staff members to do that, to show them how to do that. And a wonderful combination is somebody that's capable of doing that, but it understands the value of stepping back and letting the other staff members stand up, because it is the circle of life, and that leadership team member is probably not going to be at camp for the next 15 years. That, it's such a high turnaround that 18-year-old is going to need to learn how to do that properly, and having somebody that they admire show them how to do it is extremely important to the success of your camp. And then that being said, I think it's also understanding that leadership isn't self-sacrifice. And a lot of the time people, when they put themselves in leadership roles, like Beth and I and Ruby were just talking before the show, before we were recording, about delegating. And that Beth has really learned that there are certain skills that she doesn't necessarily have, but she's very good at picking out who has those skills and letting them do it. And I think that sometimes there's a little bit of a self-sacrifice, and it's almost like a badge of honor. Like, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night, and there's this sort of badge of honor stuff. And I work very hard to make sure that our staff members, that's not a badge of honor, but you need to take care of yourself. That's not great role modeling for the staff. If the staff are like that, that's not great role modeling for our campers. What is that saying? That you put you on the side and then now you're a hero? Because no, that's silly behavior. You're very valuable. You're important. We want you to sit down and eat. We want you to get enough sleep. So sort of that self-sacrifice mentality, I really look out for that's not happening. And if they are going to be on leadership team, I talk to them about it. And especially since we're all women, it's something that I hold very near to my heart. I don't want our women or young girls to be self-sacrificing and saying, no, 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 it's fine, it's fine. There's a lot of issues that come out when you're older if you do that. You lock that stuff up and it's going to come out in an ugly way. So, you know, so I think that's something else.
Sorry, Gab. We used to call it being good self-managers.
Right. There you go.
That was an important thing. And role modeling that, as you say, is really important.
Yeah. So so people sometimes people have a mentality of what I should be acting like as a leadership team member. And I think that we have to be aware when we're hiring staff that they have a clear understanding of what's expected of them and, you know, what we want. And it's not them being up on stage and running everything. It's also not them, the only one staying up till 3 a.m. and, you know, we want them to be raising our next, you know, leadership team members. And how do you do that? Well, that's by giving them opportunities.
Mm-hmm. We used to do a great spectrum that at Nature's Classroom that our boss would talk about every semester. So I heard it, 9 times. He'd draw on the marker board, one end is aggressive, one end is passive, and in the middle is assert. And so, where are you on that spectrum currently? And we are always trying to get closer to asserting your needs. Like, there are times when you have to maybe be a little more aggressive. There are times when you have to be a little more passive. But in the end, that end goal is when you have a need, you need to assert it. And empowering your staff for that is really important. All right, so keeping all this in mind and these qualities we're looking for, do either of you have great questions that you ask or a way to ask a staff member if these are qualities that they have?
For me, it's not necessarily about the questions, but about how we ask the questions, because anybody can answer the questions that you, in the way that you hope to hear them in an interview situation. So for me, I needed to be able to see them in action. So we did whatever we could to make that happen. And our staff, even if they were returning for their 8th or 9th or 10th year, still had to participate. So we called it our chemistry test. So it was a way to put staff in situations together in January and February prior to the summer. And we had hiring days where our staff were required to attend every year. We had one for resource staff or senior staff and one for counselors. And if they lived more than a 2-hour drive away, we would make other arrangements. But in Canada, we're pretty used to driving, so 2 hours wasn't really a lot. So in a hiring day, we would put them through get-to-know-you activities, games, gearing up through the day to group initiatives, some of them really quite challenging. We'd eat lunch together. We'd sort of spend the whole day together. And I was always watching in every scenario, in every situation, to see who was exemplifying the qualities we were looking for, who was a team player, and who was just out to make sure they looked good that day. And you can't really see that in just an interview one-on-one. And I realized that hiring day is hard for people who have international staff or staff from across the country. But I think that it's imperative to have an opportunity to do that chemistry test. And that's not just a phone call with you or just with one other person. So putting them in social and group situations, use Skype. I mean, it's a great resource we didn't have when I started directing, and it's awesome. And you can get lots of people on a call because you need to not just test their chemistry as a person, but also as a team. So for me, that was really key. We had a 3-part hiring process, which was a written application. It told you a lot about a person. Not everybody is a prolific writer, but it said something about them if things were not spell checked or didn't look professional, or it was obvious that they didn't take time to think through their answers. We had them do creative projects. So we had a question every year, for example, how would you show the importance of camp community? And they could do that any way they wanted. So it could be a poem, an essay, write a song, do a photo video, do a piece of artwork, do a video, whatever they wanted to do, but they had to answer that question. So putting all those sorts of things together really gave us more insight into them. And I think that if you think about it, you want to put more time on the hiring end because it's a lot harder to fire somebody. So if you take that time at the beginning, you probably won't end up in the difficult position of having to let them go. So don't be hasty. Take your time. And if it needs to be several Skype calls, with different people and different interactions, then do that. Or if you can't do a whole day.
Yeah, those right-hand people for me, they're going to go through my return staff interview, but then they're going to go through at least 1 to 2 other interviews that specifically address the responsibilities of the job, because it's such a key player. And that is typically when I'm going to have them in with the other director that they're going to be working really closely with. I want to make sure that we all feel good about that choice. But the question that's in my return staff interview that is always so great for everybody, but especially these positions, I ask the question, how is this summer going to be different from the last summer that you worked? And I feel like I get great insights from there. And a lot of times those folks that I'm looking for the higher up team, that question is where is my jumping off point. So asking that question, how is this summer going to be different from the last one that you worked? Gab, did you have any specific questions? Or
I have a couple. Basically, I asked them, what do staff need to be a great staff member? And then I asked them, what do you need to tell them, show them, and teach them? And it's just to get them in the mindset that staff members need guidance, and you need to know what you're looking for. That's number one. You can't lead somebody unless you know what you're looking for. So getting them to create that list of, what does a great staff member look like to you, and what do they need to become that staff member, before, during, and after, is very helpful to get them into that mindset. And we've said often that hiring is part of training. It's the start of training, and for me, this is them training as well as I'm seeing if they have that foresight that that their responsibility is going to be, this is what it's starting to look like. Is actually you understanding what it takes to be a good staff member. They can do it, but can they teach it? So that's what I'd like to add on to this glorious list.
Cool. Excellent. So our last question today is, what is it that you say to your potential leaders to instill the importance of their role and the essence of their job? We're asking them to take on a pretty abstract role a lot of times. How do you get them to take ownership of that? Let's start with you, Beth.
We talked a lot about legacy. What did they want to leave as their mark? We discussed legacies other staff members had left, those that they looked up to. And we used to do that from the time they were little tiny campers, all the way up. We talked about legacy. So it was, and I'm really proud to say it still is, a big focus of leadership training. Just leaving your mark and how you want to do that, and that you can leave your mark, good or bad. So you want to be careful as to what you can do. I think you just have to be really intentional with your campers and with your staff. I mean, if your role is to be intentional in everything you do with your campers, then you have to be intentional with your staff. It should be a part of your lexicon. Give them the language that they need to use with staff and campers by using it with them and talking about the legacy that they want to leave. And I think, too, it's not just about what you have to say to them, but having the qualities that you are looking for in them, in yourself. So you, too, have to be trustworthy, kind, have integrity, be a problem solver, all those things, if that's what you expect from your staff members. So it's not just about what you say, but how you do your job. And for me, it was always about catching them doing it right, telling them what you saw. Specific is terrific. Thank you, Michael Brandwine. DLPing, or describing, label, praising it, again, Michael, was a far more effective way than telling them when they were doing it wrong. So when I caught them doing things that talked about the importance of their role or the essence of their job, then having those conversations, taking that minute out to let them know that very specifically was always really helpful. I think it would make a big impact if you could do it as soon as possible afterwards. But if not, if you did it because a member of your leadership team came and told you they saw it, or that sort of thing, but taking the time to go out and have that conversation and let them know, I think made a big difference.
Cool. Gab, you?
I think I think, I think basically Beth has sort of, for me, summed it up. Especially the sort of showing it, role modeling it, and having the same expectations of yourself as you have of your leadership team. And I think that also comes with a similar question that I have for leadership team members about staff is, what do you expect from your leadership team? And you need to be able to convey that. And I really do think that I think what we talk about is important and valuable, but when it really comes down to your own camp, different camps have different needs and different expectations from their staff members. And the type of staff members that the camp attracts a similar group usually of difficulties and awesomeness. And you sort of have to recognize what are your difficulties and what are your awesomenesses, and how are you addressing both of them? How are you continuing one, and how are you sort of addressing the other? But having yourself that clear understanding and conveying it to them, and just getting them to tell you what's expected of them, and seeing maybe where your gaps are is very, very helpful. But I think that the modeling of the behavior is hard sometimes to do, but is really, really important, because that's how they're sort of learning and absorbing.
Cool. Yeah, I ask my staff every summer, I've said this on other podcasts, that I ask them to write down what are your expectations for the administration to help you to a successful summer, or to support you to a successful summer. And they write that information down on note cards, and those sit at my desk all throughout the summer. When I'm having a rough day, I go back through those. But those are also something that I share with those leadership team members and say, this is the job that I need you to help me do. And I also often, when talking to those folks, I explain to them, I used to work in sound. I did a lot of the live sound for theatrical productions in high school and also in college. And nobody pays any attention to the sound person until something goes wrong. And that's very much a director's job at camp is, if you're doing stuff well, people should be asking, what do you do all day? Because they may not see so much of what you do. And you just kind of this magical fairy that always seems available to do anything that ever needs to be done, right? And so explaining that to the staff and getting them to take ownership of, you're sitting in the director's chair, you're sitting in the production assistant's chair. If you're doing your job flawlessly, which we never do, but that's what we strive for, right? It would be like people would ask you, what is it that you do all day? Because and there's a difference between that and just sitting in the office and sucking up AC all day. But that's what you're striving for. You do your job so well that it looks easy, and that things just get done, because that's so much of what we need at camp. Any other thoughts on that one?
No, that's great.
Good.
I
That's
love the sound analogy.
Let me tell you, when those microphones start,
yeah.
crackling, everybody's looking back at you.
Yeah, that's it. But when it's perfect sound, nobody
notices.
Nope,
Not at all.
nope. It's a very good point.
Cool. Well, I think it is now the time in the show for Gab to recap what all we've learned today.
So much. We've learned so much. So, starting with, where do you get your leaders? Hopefully from in-house, and try to start, making the environment conducive for their learning, and long progressive learning. And if not, try to get recommendations from colleagues. Look to your network and perhaps have a support system for them, because it's quite a daunting task. Qualities. Well, we have definitely not a short list in this one. Responsible, they have to have heart, integrity, kind, problem solvers. They ask for help, want to learn. They want to raise the next leaders, big picture thinkers, but also attention to detail. Team members, communicate that their friend should be fired. They do the small jobs, they follow the mission, uphold it, and of course we don't want them to be self-sacrificers, we want them to be role models. So I'm sure we could continue adding on to that list, but that's sort of the general list for now. Some great questions. Try to do creative projects, which we do at World because of Beth and Travis, and we love it. Chemistry tests. Use Skype. It's amazing. Also, put some time into hiring, because firing takes a lot longer. Address the responsibilities of the job. and ask an amazing question. How is this summer going to be different than the last? Also, what do you think your staff members need from you to be great staff members? And just recapping what we just talked about, how to make this abstract job be a little bit clearer, role model, work with them while they're on the job, and give specific feedback.
Cool. Thanks, Gab.
No problem.
So we would love for you all to get involved with the Camp Code podcast. You can join us on various social medias using the hashtag Camp Code, and we'd love to hear from you about what topics you would like to discuss, any guests that you would recommend that we talk to, any great leadership training tips that you would like to share, because we love sharing in this industry. It's what it's all about. It's what makes camp so great. Also, something that we would ask of our listeners, if you found this podcast to be useful or have heard some great tidbits, or even if you just want to see us coming back, please search for Camp Code on iTunes or on Stitcher and leave a rating and review for us. We really appreciate hearing your feedback, and it also just helps keep this show going. So please seek that out. Again, find Camp Code on iTunes, and you can leave a review or a rating there. So next up, we just want to share with each of you all how you can get in touch with us if you want any further information or have questions about some of the stuff that you've heard today. So Beth, start us off, please.
Sure, you can find me on our website at camphacker.tv, or email me directly at beth@camphacker.tv, or the hashtag camphacker.
Cool. Gab?
You can follow me on Twitter at Gabrielle Rail. Check out where I work at world.com. And you can also check out some of my graphic stuff at raildesign.com.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm at RubyLynn85. You can also see where I work and follow a lot of our blog posts. I'm responsible for writing at greenriverpreserve.org. And for our next podcast, Beth is going to be sharing with us what we will be discussing.
I'm excited about this one. We're going to be talking, I'm excited about all of them, but I'm really excited about this one. Best practices for leadership training at a girls' camp.
Oh, and we do plan to continue on as in the series, and hopefully in this season addressing leadership training at a boys' camp as well as in co-ed camps, because there are some specifics that can lead you to success in those various environments. So we want to talk about those. Our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training, and we would love to hear some of your most memorable moments or most effective tips. You can tell us what those are using the hashtag Camp Code or reaching out to any one of us. Today, I'm actually going to throw back to last episode that we recorded of our podcast, because Gab said something that just totally resonated with me. And so I just want to further recommend that everybody do this. One of the recommendations that she made on our last podcast about kind of gearing up for the next year is to re-interview yourself. And this particular summer, when people ask me, how'd your summer go? I answer, it's good. It was a learning summer, which every camp director knows, like, oh, what happened? And what I can say is that my staff was phenomenal, and program-wise, things went really well. But there were just some personal things that challenged me this summer and really made me question, like, is this the right path for me? And to know that happens, it absolutely happens, and to take the time to really refocus yourself is critical. And I got to the end of this summer pretty worn out and pretty tired, and again, like, really questioning if camp was where I wanted to devote so many hours and all the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes. And I was lucky enough to be able to go up and visit Beth and Travis in Canada, and had an amazing trip there, and came back just rejuvenated and revitalized and ready to go, but still hadn't totally hit my stride yet. And so when Gab said that in our last podcast, re-interview yourself, I immediately emailed Sarah and was like, when we're on our road trip next week, you're interviewing me and we're going to do this, because I think I've lost sight of some of that focus on why I'm here. And it was great in the car. We had a nice 5-hour long drive, and I got to really just kind of think about it, and she was able to push me on some of my answers. And what it boils down to is I'm in this industry for youth development, for this podcast that we talked about today. so that I can model to our new leaders what it takes to be a good leader, how to be a good manager, how to go out in the world and grow leaders. What if every manager in the world was striving for that? What a great place it would be. And I've had some incredible mentors along the way who taught me how to be a camp director and how to be a staff manager and how to grow leaders. And so I think that that's where my strength is, and that's what I get to give back. So it was like, oh, there it is. There's my mission. And just being able to jump into this year with that very clear was so, so critical. And it helps when you're making the phone calls that are hard and dealing with the challenging conversations. When you have that clear vision, it just makes it so much easier. So re-interview yourself. I can't say it enough. So thanks so much for listening today, and please join us on the hashtag Camp Code.
Boom.